After talking about the Traveler, it has come to my attention that the Wanderer is not the most hated character in Genshin. It's not A either, and nope, it's not Child. It's actually PAIMON. You guys really don't like PAIMON, don't you? Because same, I'm also not the biggest fan of hers. I think she is one of the reasons why the Traveler is so uninteresting and why some quests can feel unbearable even though they have an interesting premise. So let's talk about how PAIMON became the most hated character in Genshin Impact. Some of it I think is just her fault. She has a very shrill personality, but not all of it is, which is something that I will talk about in more detail later on in the video. But for now, in my opinion, one of the biggest things that makes PAIMON unbearable is that she's just a bad companion and a bad comedic character. Now, I'm not gonna expect for PAIMON to be the best companion that we can have in a video game. The question that I'm going to be exploring today is what makes her so unbearable. Because making a good companion for the protagonist of a video game isn't the most difficult thing to do. We've had plenty of good memorable companions. Some serve purpose to the story and some are just there. Personality wise, PAIMON doesn't have the most interesting personality. She's pretty one note. Her most distinctive traits are that she floats, she's greedy, and she likes food, most of which are always framed in a comedic way. She's supposed to be the comedic relief in a lot of the situations that the Traveler find themselves in. She can be rude and shrill in certain situations, but you kind of always know that she at the end of the day means well. So then why is that most players can't stand her? Some parts of it is due to the simple fact that her line delivery has gone a lot higher in pitch, especially in the English voice acting. Now, this is probably not the VA's fault, and most are probably just the directions that the actors were given, but because PAIMON has the same tone 99% of the time, it gets pretty damn annoying. She's high-pitched and screechy in situations where it's supposed to be emotional and another character is pouring their heart out. That paired with her shrill personality is the perfect combination to a character that comes off as very annoying and obnoxious, even though that is definitely not what the devs intended. PAIMON is supposed to be our companion. She's supposed to be the one that makes the Traveler's journey less lonely, and even if she's intended to be annoying, it's at least supposed to be endearing. Her intended personality is probably the funny companion that has no filter and has no regard for consequences and just says everything that goes through her mind. It's supposed to be funny. The way she gives nicknames and is rude to powerful deities is supposed to be funny. Tone Deaf Bard did get a chuckle out of me back in the day, but they can't just keep doing the PAIMON is being rude to this 500-year-old being for the 4th time and expect me to find it hilarious. It's just not. Now, comedy is subjective. Everyone can have a different idea of what they think is funny. Like, some people might enjoy quips like the ones that they have in Marvel movies, especially the older ones. I don't really watch Marvel anymore, but anyway, if you enjoy witty quips, you probably enjoy that kind of comedy a lot. Some people might enjoy dry humor. It's different for everyone. But even if PAIMON is not to your taste as a comedic character, like personally for me, she isn't, but she did in the beginning manage to force out a chuckle or two. However, that's only possible once or twice in very specific situations. Like, remember the emergency food jokes? I remember those being very beloved and a lot of people consider that pretty funny. The same with how she's very into food, but it's all in the execution. If we are told the same joke over and over again over the course of 4 years, it will not be funny. It will get old. It's like they're trying to make her a comedic relief to the silent Traveler, and when the Traveler can't really react to her jokes or her antics other than 2 dialogue options every once in a while, it just becomes a bad experience for everyone involved. Because we're not really getting anything. If the Traveler reacts to it, it would be closer to a witty banter, which develops their bond as traveling companions, which can be pretty compelling to see. If a comic relief companion is really what the devs are going for, then it's definitely not well executed. It's already bad enough that they think making the same joke about how hungry PAIMON is will still be funny 4 years into the game, but it's worse if they think that this is the best way to establish a character's personality. It's the simplest and easiest way, sure, but it often has the opposite outcome, and most of the time it's not the desired outcome. Do you know what ends up being the outcome? She ends up being rude and obnoxious. And while some rude characters can be entertaining, like case in point the Wanderer, it's entertaining because it's done intentionally. Like, the Wanderer is designed to be an asshole. He's not nice at all, but because he is a character, like an actual character, one of the most developed characters in the game, actually, we have a full understanding understanding why he's an asshole. He has a lot of anger within him for hundreds of years, so it explains his behavior. Doesn't justify it, but it explains it. Paimon is rude in order to be funny, and it won't work as much as they probably intended it to be because that's one of her very few personality traits. She has no depth at this point, and because she's just the guide and mascot to this game, I don't think she'll ever get any. So at this point, she's rude, talks too much, and is not very helpful, which is the one thing that she should be, and that is helpful, because she's supposed to be the guide, which begs the question, why is she so stupid? It's hilarious to me how she's supposed to be the guide for the traveler, yet at the same time, Hoyo also seems to want her to be as stupid as possible in hopes that it will generate a chuckle or two multiple times for 4 years straight. There's a difference between being naive and slightly gullible and being so stupid that she can't seem to retain any information about her surroundings. She's supposed to be the guide. She's supposed to know things. But 99% of her dialogue is never useful. Most of the important information is given to the traveler through other characters. So this renders Paimon kinda useless. She's supposed to be the one giving us information, but narratively it makes a lot more sense when the featured characters are the ones giving exposition. It's just a great way to introduce new regions and new characters that the devs are hoping for you to spend your money on. This leaves Paimon in a very weird place because she is left with only saying very obvious things like, oh, this is Mondstadt and this is Natlan, because she can't say anything more. For example, in Natlan, we learn how the nation's Archon has always been human from Kachina, someone who's native to the land. In Sumeru, we learn about Nahida through Dunyazard. In Fontaine, Farina just shows up. Something that's also really annoying to me is that she's not always like this. In We Will Be Reunited, she knows stuff about Khaenri'ah. Here, she was actually about to explain Khaenri'ah's history to the traveler while they were talking to Dainsleif, but as we come to find out, the traveler already knew about Khaenri'ah. I personally have not felt that Paimon has given me useful information in the Archon quest since Mondstadt. Like, that is the only time that I think Paimon truly acted like a guide, where she explained about the Seven and Mondstadt being the nation of wind and freedom and blah blah blah. Where did this version of Paimon go? I think there's just so much that could have been done with Paimon as a guide, but it's severely underutilized. If they wanted her personality to be obsessed with food, they could have given her interesting dialogue, like she could exclusively give information related to food from the Seven Nations. Like, this would make sense for her character being a foodie and a guide, and it would actually make her feel like she has something informative to say. For example, the way she explained briefly about Liyue Cuisine way back in the Liyue Archon quest when we were about to meet Zhongli. And this can also be a role that is unique to her, because it wouldn't make sense if, I don't know, let's say Neuvillette started talking about Fontanian cuisine when all he does is taste testing water. And because she has nothing to do and nothing to say, she becomes a child. That's what her character is at this point. She's just a loud, rude, floating child. She lacks the emotional intelligence to read the room, she lacks manners, screeches every time she speaks, and doesn't even have the best common knowledge. Like, for example, I don't know why the scene from Unreconciled Stars just stood out to me even 4 years later, but Paimon's response to the balladier's "sky is fake" statement just bothers me so much. Like, it's pretty clear for anyone who's not Paimon that the balladier's statement has a deeper meaning. He's not an idiot. And for Paimon to take that so literally and then acting like the balladeer is the one being stupid is just so painful to me. Paimon just takes things at face value like a child, and if she is meant to be the gullible, naive, and childlike companion, then fine, let her be that. But at the very least, can they treat her like a character and not do what they're doing now, hoping that Paimon can still play the role as a guide when she never gives new and useful information, but instead just repeats them. That's what I'm talking about here, which makes her the crutch to the traveler. As mentioned in my traveler video, she exists as a crutch. She talks over the traveler 99% of the time. This takes away a lot of agency and screen time away from the traveler, and I think most people are more interested in the traveler than they are of Paimon. This is again the result of pretty much the fact that being a guide to Teyvat is a useless role, so her dialogues end up only serving two purposes: regurgitation and simplification. Regurgitation is a problem because because it bloats the dialogue in Genshin so much that it becomes annoying. This might be debatable, but even if we have the attention span of a goldfish, we still don't need to hear Paimon repeating the same information every single time it's presented on screen. The simplification part of her dialogue is also annoying because most people that don't actively skip dialogues will probably comprehend the information being presented just fine, especially the ones that aren't related to deep lore or any complex stories. Being treated like you're 5 years old by a game isn't the most enjoyable experience, plus it just makes it really boring. Having spoon-feeding dialogue can also take away from the experience of connecting the dots for the players. You know, that satisfaction of finally putting all of the puzzle pieces together. You just don't get that. Now, I'm not denying that regurgitation and simplification can be useful in certain situations, especially when it involves really complicated lore. Having someone that can repeat and simplify dialogue once in a while can be useful. Keyword, once in a while. It also doesn't help that Paimon kinda takes important dialogues away from the traveler, who gets to greet people when they bump into other characters. Not the traveler, but Paimon, who gets to react to new information given to the traveler. Paimon, who gets to share their opinion on things happening in a quest. That's right, Paimon. One scene that I remember being pretty annoying to me personally is when the traveler and Paimon were trying to get their hands on the divine knowledge capsules from Dory. Here, Paimon falls for Dory's scam, and to me, it's actually the moment I realized why Paimon's running gags just feel awful, and that's because Hoyo has no interest in treating her like a character. Everything that comes out of her mouth that's not useless information is for the sake of a gag. Paimon is actually a mascot and nothing else. I think this wouldn't be that big of a problem if Paimon is given actual dialogue with the traveler, or any kind of motivation or anything that makes her feel more than a mascot, and it wouldn't be that big of a problem if she doesn't take 99% of the screen time in the game. If only we get something similar to the traveler's voice lines. This would actually make Paimon have a purpose, and that is to build up the traveler as a character as well as herself, but it will also provide information and entertainment towards the players. Her dialogue won't just feel like it's wasting our time. This also wouldn't make the traveler feel like a sidekick. Because of all of the things that were mentioned, Paimon's inherent problem is that not only does she talk too much, but the traveler is also the one having to pay the price for this. I've always been a believer that Paimon doesn't need to shut up, but it's the traveler that actually needs to speak, so that they would have conversations and their personalities can bounce off of each other. If the traveler doesn't talk, then their personality cannot bounce off of Paimon's. Paimon's personality, as we have established, isn't exactly everyone's cup of tea. And because Paimon is the one in the spotlight, the traveler is just kinda there. And what happens when the traveler is incapable of having or showing a personality? We're left with Paimon's. Everything about the traveler becomes secondary. An example of this that comes to mind for me is in Yoimiya's second story quest. Yoimiya asks the traveler a fairly personal question about their sibling and if they've seen each other after they were separated. So tell me, why is Paimon the one answering? Why can't the traveler just answer? Paimon is at her best as a companion when she bounces off the traveler. Like, she can fit the annoying little sister character trope sometimes, but in order for her to feel like an actual character and not a mouthpiece is for her to bounce off the traveler. Their conversations in the traveler's voice lines are entertaining. It's interesting to learn things about the traveler and Paimon and the world around them when they're both talking. But for the majority of the game, the traveler is the sidekick. Paimon is the one conversing with character. She talks over the traveler. She reacts to things that the traveler is supposed to be reacting to. I'm not interested in what Paimon has to say about Furina's life after she stepped down as Archon. I wanted to see what the traveler would think. I want to know what the traveler thinks of a lot of the important moments in the game, like how they actually feel about the Archons, the Fatui, the Harbingers, everything. But because Paimon does all of the talking and reacting, the traveler feels like the sidekick that fights for her and buys her food. If not a guide, then Paimon would better serve as a companion to the traveler. Now, I know what you're going to say, she is a companion already, but what I mean is that a companion as in someone who the traveler can interact with and banter with actively, that we can see on screen. This way, it makes her character and dialogue have purpose again, and it's there to elevate the traveler instead of taking stuff away from them. I hate making comparisons, but a good example is Honkai Star Rail with Danheng and March 7th. Now disclaimer, I haven't really played Star Rail again, but I did play a lot of it during its release, and both Danheng and March 7th is what I consider to be good companions and what Paimon should have been, at least in my opinion. They both have enough depth and actual interesting dialogue that's not talking over the trailblazer or repeating information, which results in an interesting group dynamic. Out of the two, March 7th is probably the closest one to Paimon in terms of personality. In a way, I think March 7th is a more fleshed out and toned down version of Paimon. They are both companions, they're both very cheerful and bad at reading the room, but March 7th is handled by the devs like an actual character first, companion second. She, at least from what I can remember, doesn't regurgitate information as much or at all even. Her personality is also just a lot less exaggerated than Paimon, which is probably why she doesn't feel like a trope, and there's just also the fact that the Trailblazer just has better dialogue options. So March 7th's reactions to them are also just a lot more interesting and entertaining. This is obviously hindered by the fact that Paimon herself is a mystery, like no one knows what she is. Even people like Albedo have no idea what she is, and this is obviously done on purpose, so they are definitely building up to something, I think. But this to me doesn't justify her basically making the story almost unbearable for 4 years as of now. Like, if the big Paimon reveal end up being true and she is hiding something major that's related to the story later on at the end of the game, it still doesn't change the fact that she's been a bad character for what, 5-6 years at that point? If that is indeed the goal, then the devs could have treated Paimon like a character. Like, they could have built up something with her, give her nuances and character moments that give her depth, anything other than what we've gotten so far. Another thing that Paimon does is that she announces how she feels all the time. Now, this normally wouldn't be a problem, but because Paimon is doing all of the talking all the time and is the main character at this point, it almost feels like she's telling the players how to feel, and because it's often very simplified, that can ruin the tone of the story a little bit. Now, if you're an edgy bitch like me and would like to see more angst in Genshin and prefer the game to not feel like a Sunday morning cartoon most of the time, especially as we progress more and more into the story, then Paimon is probably your worst nightmare. Her very existence makes it difficult to set up a scene that's dark and gruesome or even a little bit serious. It's hard to do that when she shrieks at everything that moves. This is also why quests like Kari Bear feels a lot darker, because imagine if that quest had Paimon screeching every time Ida does something creepy. Ida was able to feel like an actual husk of a man at the brink of insanity because of the setting of the quest. We're isolated in this strange house with a creepy upside down thing in this dark sanctuary. The traveler is alone. No one is there to help them, and there's no Paimon to react to Ida's weird quirks. The traveler is stuck in their own thoughts, and we finally have proper immersion. And in front of them is a character that's dealing with intense grief and slowly descending into madness. Any attempt at humor or screeching would have ruined the quest. You can be having like a very intense and serious conversation with a character, and then Paimon will butt in and it will just destroy the tone. Paimon just creates a big problem when it comes to the tone of the story. And it's not to say that she can't have a reaction, like she can go aw or something, but it's when she starts speaking that it becomes a problem. It's when she tries to be funny and saying something completely outlandish that tanks the tone of the story. Paimon's simple dialogue also just automatically erases a lot of nuances, and it's also something that's just inevitable considering that's her only personality. You can't be simple and also maintain nuances that were probably in the original dialogue. And because Paimon usually repeats those dialogues in a simplified way, it kinda erases some of the nuances in the original delivery. This always happens when she tries to simplify anything that has a bit of complexity to them. Like, for example, the Fatui. A lot of people kinda came at me for defending the Fatui, and I still stand by the fact that they are a group that has nuances to them. Like, they are villains, like they have no doubt done lots of horrible and evil acts, but a lot of people that are associated with the Fatui are also just people. Case in point, Linny and Lynette. They are very far from what the average person would call a villain, but Paimon still insists that they're the bad guys because they have that Fatui label on them, at least in that one conversation that I really disliked. Everything afterwards is fine. And this kind of dialogue also only exists because it's there to again simplify a very complex and morally questionable but nuanced organization. It's funny how if we think about it, everything I just mentioned is still not really her fault. All of the things that are wrong with Paimon aren't because she's Paimon, but because how the devs and the writers are using her as a character, which they aren't. Paimon, at least up until this point, is not a character anymore. She's a mouthpiece. That and the added fact that Paimon, at the end of the day, is not a character that should be narrating the story anyway. But because she has no actual purpose anymore and Hoyo doesn't know what to do with her, that's all she's left with. It also doesn't help that her tone and her voice is just not suited to be a narrator. She just objectively has a higher pitched voice, and it's probably just the voice direction and not the VA's fault, and it's probably on purpose. Because again, she's supposed to be cute and funny, but she can't be high-pitched and shrill and cute and funny and also be the narrator that talks over the traveler 99% of the time. I think this is also why Paimon is just more tolerable in world quests. Like, she still repeats stuff, but because we're not exposed to her voice every few seconds, it's just more bearable. Paimon is at her best as a companion when she and the traveler actually interact. Like, she can fit the annoying little sister character trope sometimes, but in order for her to actually feel like a character and not a mouthpiece is for her to actually have conversations and interact with the traveler on screen. And this is something that's not possible because Hoyo still wouldn't let the traveler talk or have more dialogue. Okay, credit where credit is due. I personally love this moment between Paimon and the traveler in Natlan. It stood out to me because Paimon has a pretty soft heart, which to me is one of her best traits. And during the war in Natlan, she was devastated to see the damage that's been done to Natlan by the Abyss. Paimon is basically a child, right? And she, like any child, can't stand the sight of violence that comes with war. So it's very natural for her to react in a situation like this. And when the traveler actually spoke in response, trying to comfort her, expressing how they wanted to win this war, it was a great moment for both of their characters. Because it serves purpose. It shows how soft-hearted Paimon truly is and how determined the traveler is to win against the Abyss, why they needed to win. And that scene with the traveler on the balloon as they gaze over Natlan, a place that used to be vibrant and full of life and color, just made the scene a lot more emotional too. It was a great scene, and it wasn't even a high-budget cutscene. It wasn't even a cutscene, it was just a random dialogue that happens. Another thing that made that moment so great and impactful to me was because the traveler spoke. You can actually hear their voice. It added so much weight to their dynamic and friendship that we've never seen before. And that scene was, what, like 15 seconds max? It takes that little effort to actually make Paimon and the traveler an interesting duo to follow. So I guess that's the solution? I don't know. I think while the traveler can stand on their own as a character, if they actually speak or if the devs would let them speak, Paimon, on the other hand, can only be a good companion if the traveler is a good protagonist, which, as we've discussed, they're not. So it's really hard for Paimon to carry the weight of everything that the traveler should be carrying, while also acting as the annoying little sister character. Their conversations in the traveler's voice lines are entertaining because Paimon actually feels like a character. She has things to say. Other than that, Paimon can actually be entertaining when she serves a purpose. A recent example of this for me is Citlali's introduction in the latest Natlan Archon quest. I think in this case, Paimon's annoying loud personality suited the moment. The whole point of that scene is to introduce Citlali, who prior to this is pretty mysterious. All we know about her is what we've heard from other characters and that she's pretty scary. So Paimon, being Paimon, runs her mouth about Citlali despite not really knowing her. And Citlali, as we learn later on, is actually someone who tries her best to fit in and be normal due to her circumstances. She's an extraordinary person who's trying to to cosplay as someone who's ordinary. She tries to look trendy and tries to imitate how younger people speak. So it makes her an endearing yet awkward character, and using Paimon to introduce her in all of her awkwardness is a good call in my opinion. It's actually funny to see how Paimon immediately takes cover behind the Traveler when she sees Citlali, and it's funny to see Citlali failing to act like a normal human would. In this scene, Paimon talks a lot, like she yaps, but it's for a purpose. It's not to regurgitate and it's not to simplify anything. The purpose of Paimon's yapping in the scene is to be a tool to introduce Citlali in an entertaining way. And Paimon in this case is also bouncing off of other characters' traits without taking away from the Traveler, because there's just no way the Traveler would be the one bad-mouthing another character. I think most players are fine with Paimon if she just didn't speak over the Traveler. She actually has a lot of great moments in the game and she can be a very endearing character. And like I said in my Traveler video, it wouldn't really be Genshin without Paimon. The problem remains that for most of the time, she doesn't have anyone to actually converse with and for her personality to bounce off of. But when she does, it can be pretty entertaining. Paimon and Ito's interactions are a good example of this. It's funny to see how two knuckleheads would interact. But when she just talks and talks and talks without the Traveler being able to say anything back and just nods 90% of the time, she comes off as obnoxious. In the Traveler's voice lines, she apparently helped with their training. Why is this never shown on screen? I will never understand. Conversations and stuff like these are actually what makes them like a real duo that's traveling together, so it's a shame that we never get to see them, or barely get to see them at all. I will draw some comparisons again on what I think is a good combination of a silent protagonist and a mascot by using Joker and Morgana from Persona 5. Joker is silent, but he does have a lot of dialogue options, and Morgana, who is with him more than the other characters, react to his dialogues differently depending on which option you pick. But the problem with Genshin is that there's no actual dialogue options for this to happen, because all of the Traveler's dialogue options just say the same thing. Sometimes it's just a sentence being cut in two. So Paimon can't even really react to the Traveler in any real way. Morgana also doesn't talk over Joker. He mostly reacts and they actually converse. They are separate characters first, companions second. It's really just how the devs choose to use these characters that matters most. And because Paimon is not utilized in any real way, this is the reason why she feels like she just takes up space. That, and add the inconsistencies in what she's supposed to be, like is she supposed to be a comic relief, a narrator, or the guide, and we get a very unpleasant companion that feels like she takes up more time than she should. Have you ever imagined Genshin without Paimon? I think removing Paimon entirely is not the solution though. I'm not gonna lie, having no Paimon in quests like Caribert can be very enjoyable. As mentioned, it does automatically set a more serious tone, but there's just something about having a companion that makes the journey, well, a little less lonely. There are moments where she is sweet and thoughtful towards the Traveler. A personal favorite Paimon moment of mine is during the Inazuma Archon quest when the Traveler was unconscious and Paimon just refused to let them go even though the Shogun was walking menacingly about to stomp on them. That moment has always stuck with me. She was very sweet in that moment. And as evidenced by the most recent Archon quest, Paimon gets very anxious whenever they have to part ways with the Traveler. Another moment that comes to mind is during Act 2 of the Sumeru Archon quest, where she was just really emotional and anxious to be separated from the Traveler. Another moment that's actually kind of funny to me is also in the Sumeru Archon quest, the one with Sino where she pretends to be a robot. Like, that was genuinely a funny moment because it's very situational and it's something that we've never seen before, and it's just very Paimon, a joke that only she can do because it plays on the fact that no one really knows what she is. But a lot of these moments come few and far between and are often overshadowed by all of her yapping. Paimon can be the little sister character. She's relatable in a way because who doesn't love food and money? You probably love food and money. All of her endearing traits just get overshadowed. And this video is written before the final act of the Natlan Archon quest, so I'm not exactly sure on what's gonna happen, but it seems like the Traveler is going to be going on an adventure without Paimon. This never really happens outside of Dainslift quests, so I'm excited to see what happens. There's still so much that we don't know about Paimon too, and while I'm pretty convinced they will have a big reveal about her later on, maybe, it still annoys me that this is pretty much ignored for 90% of the game as of now. No one knows what she actually is, but I guess she is at least as of now, the closest thing the Traveler has to family. She's also the Traveler's #1 fan, and it can be really endearing. And really, I don't think most players would mind her even when Paimon is her loud, shrill, and squeaky self, as long as it feels like she isn't taking anything from the Traveler. If you want to be a little bit emo, then let me remind you of the description for Paimon's card. You might be one of the countless stars, but you're Paimon's whole world. Yeah, I read that pretty badly, but you get it. That's pretty much it. That's all I have to say about Paimon. Let me know what you think of her throughout your playthrough of Genshin. Let me know what are your favorite moments with her. What are the moments that made you want to stomp her? I don't know. Just let me know in the comments. Let me know where you stand. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!